Hello. So, yesterday I decided to preach on the first reading rather than the gospel because I just couldn't take any more bread of life discourse. Been preaching about that a lot lately. That's what the gospels have been about over and over. So, but the first reading was a famous reading and an interesting one. It's the story of Saul's conversion. Um, where Saul is a religious zealot who is a Pharisee, and he gets letters from the chief priests in Jerusalem, giving him permission to go to Damascus and to bring back, giving him authority to bring back the disciples of Jesus in chains. But on the way there, he has a vision. He's blinded by a light. Literally blinded. He can't see. He hears a voice saying, "Saul, why are you persecuting me?" And for 3 days he's blind until one of the disciples, Ananias, comes and lays hands on him. And then, his life changes. His eyes are opened literally and, metaphorically, spiritually. So I was reflecting on this notion of being blind and being able to see. And it reminded me of a story, true story, of a fellow in Alaska by the name of Dick Proenneke. You can look him up on YouTube. Alone in the Wilderness is the DVD that's about his life. But there's YouTube videos on it. But anyway, he went, in middle age, at age 55, he left his job in Alaska as a diesel mechanic, and he went to live in the remote wilderness of Alaska, where he lived off the land for the next 30 years. He lived alone. He lived isolated. A plane came in, I believe, twice a year to drop off a few supplies that he couldn't get otherwise. Just a small bush plane would come in and bring things like, beans and rice and things like that. But mostly he lived off the land, built his own little cabin out there. And I'm sure he had this dream to do that for a long time. But like most dreams in life, we often don't follow them because of our concern for security, for safety, for the predictability of life. Benjamin Franklin had a wonderful phrase where he said, anyone who would give up his freedom for temporary security deserves neither freedom nor security. And so oftentimes that's what prevents us from following our dreams. Our dreams are too risky. They intrigue us, they capture us, they draw us, but we're afraid. I often have dreams of being a writer, but quitting my job and pursuing writing full-time is it's a little nerve-wracking. I don't know the first thing about the business of writing. I don't know if I could produce enough to make anything. I hate to leave my job for an extended period of time because I don't know how likely I'll be able to get back into it. But the older I get, those arguments become less and less convincing, and the dream is more and more of a draw. And this idea of security is really an illusion anyway. And sometimes it takes a crisis for us to realize that. And in the case of Dick Proenneke, what happened was, at the age of 55, working all these years as a diesel mechanic, also at the same time harboring these dreams of going into the wilderness and living alone, with all the risks in doing that. But still playing it safe at his job. Well, something happened at his job. There was an accident, and some chemicals got sprayed in his eyes. And it looked for a moment that he was going to be blind for the rest of his life. And turns out he wasn't. He recovered his sight fully. But there was a time where it was a little dicey, where he thought, you know what, I think I might be blind here for the rest of my life. And I can think of few things that would humble a person more than that would make you reevaluate your whole life more than that. That would make you say, you know what, I'm only here for a little bit of time on this earth. Not following the calling of my heart, not following my dreams is a silly, silly thing. Especially if I'm just doing it for security. Because you know what? We're all going to die eventually anyway. There's a beautiful line in The Alchemist. The story of the Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And this boy meets an alchemist and they get captured by raiders. And, they buy themselves some time by saying, give us 3 days and this boy will be able to turn into the wind. And they want to see that. So they give him 3 days. They don't kill him outright, but if he can't turn himself into the wind, he's going to die. And so the boy complains to the alchemist. He says, I'm going to die in 3 days because I can't turn myself into the wind. And the alchemist says, we bought 3 days, which was more than we had before. Secondly, a lot can change in 3 days. You might learn how to turn yourself into the wind. And besides that, we all got to die sometime. Better to die following your dream than to live a long life not following it. And so that's what happened to Dick Proenneke. After this accident, after this close call where he thought he was going to lose his sight for the rest of his life, but then regained it. It made him reevaluate everything, what was important, what he wanted to spend the rest of his life doing. And he moved into the Alaskan wilderness. And he lived alone with all the risks of living alone in the Alaskan wilderness, completely cut off. There was no easy way for him to get in or out. A plane came in twice a year, no contact with the outside world. And the same thing happened to Paul, or Saul, as he was called at this point. He was living his life one way. He was blinded. He lost his sight. And few things humble a person more than losing their sight. He reevaluates his life and changes his ways. So a lot of times people will change their life after a crisis like that, but I think it's one of those things you don't have to go through personally. And the fact that people like Saul, that Dick Proenneke have gone through it, should be enough to teach us that today's the day. Today's the day to start living the rest of your life.